Welcome at the GenAI Byte series, a series about GenAI. Today I'm going to talk about the large language model lifecycle in the real world. My name is Mick Vleeshouwer and I'm a technical specialist at Microsoft. So if we look at the world of GenAI, a lot has changed in the last years. And the reason why this has changed is because there has been a lot of compute became available. So before, if we look a bit at Moore's law and the scaling laws, it changed every 15 to 18 months. But if we look at exactly the last, let's say, 4 years, it really scaled a lot more. And because of this and because of the extra compute, there's a lot of innovation happening. To give you a recent example, GPT-4 has been launched over a bit more than a year ago. And in that year, you already see that compared to what they had a year ago, now it's already, the cost is a 12th of it, and it's 6 times faster. So this means that these models are not just getting better, but they're also getting faster and cheaper. And if you want to cope with this, you really need to think, okay, how can I join this GenAI world and how can I keep up with all the changes? And because all these models and all the world around us is changing, we also see that applications are changing. So if we now look at intelligent applications, it often has a universal interface. And with universal interface, we actually mean multimodality. So think about the interface where you not just chat with, but where you can send videos, you can send images, you can use speech, and it works all at the same time. And previously, all these kind of applications were explicitly programmed. So we gave it a task and we say, okay, for this task, this is how you have to run the task, and we programmed every function by hand. But now with these so-called large language models, we actually see that they are responsible to do reasoning and planning themselves. So we just give the application a few of the available functions, and then based on the task or the question of the user, the large language models will look at the task and the planning and say, okay, we're going to call this function and then this function, and this is how our application will work. And same with memory and context. It's adding the context of the application or of your company data at the right time within the application. And by leveraging memory, it also has a long-term memory so it can understand what has been discussed before. But if you want to get those such applications and if you want to keep up with the changing world of GenAI, we also need to talk about the process. And that's actually the main topic for today. Because what I see with a lot of our Dutch customers is that this is actually very challenging. And just like DevOps and MLOps and everything we had before, it's of course again about people, process and tooling. But there's some things different. Of course, you can build upon your existing foundation. You don't have to start from scratch, and any principle that you know from DevOps and MLOps will most likely apply. But one big change is actually the target audience. Because before, we were really talking with the data scientists. And the data scientists, they were building machine learning models from scratch. You're using your company data, you're having some kind of test set, and then you're looking like, what's my accuracy? And in the end, what you're delivering is a model. But when we talk about large language models, we actually see that the audience is changing. Yes, of course, as a data scientist, you are still very relevant in this world. But we also see that it's now more a software engineering challenge. And the reason why this is also a software engineering challenge is because often these models, these large language models, they already served as an API. So it's already a model as a service, and you can just leverage these pre-built models. And with these pre-built models, you're building applications. So you're building an orchestration layer around it, where you're adding your own logic, your own company data, and you're making everything work together. And also, if we want to evaluate this, previously we had a test set that was just like, okay, if this matches my test set, then it's good or it's bad. Now, with these kind of large language models, it's different because the output can be a bit different every time because they are non-deterministic. But you will also see that the input is free text. And it's very hard to come up with like 1,000 examples of exactly the same text. So there we have a lot of tooling. But before we go there, let's just walk you through the LLM lifecycle in the real world, what we see with customers, but also show you some real-life demos of how you can overcome this. And it all starts with ideation. So first, of course, the most important part is a business need. If there's no business need, then we're just playing around, we're just playing for fun. But in the end, we all want to solve a business problem and really add value to the company. And here it's important that we have some kind of playground. We really want to try the prompts, we want to try the large language models, understand what's the best one. And then we also want to understand, okay, is this a feasible project? Is this possible with the current technology? Or is this something that's too far ahead? So let me show you a few things how you can get started with these kind of large language models. So what you're seeing here is actually Azure AI Studio. And within Azure AI Studio, we have the model catalog. And within the model catalog, we have, of course, the proprietary models like GPT-4o and all the other latest OpenAI models. But there are also a lot of other models available, like proprietary models from Mistral, DCAI, A21 Labs, but also open source, of course, from Databricks and just from Hugging Face. And what I can do here is I can select a model, I can try different models, and I can play around with them. And that's what happens in the playground. On the left side, I can change my prompt, and here I can interact with it. So for example, let me just load one of the examples, and I'm building a hiking recommendations chatbot. So here you will see my prompt, and what I can do as a business user or as a developer, I can change the prompt, I can put in some text, and I can see already how these models interact and if the business case can be interesting. So for example, I will chat with it, and now I see, okay, it's behaving like this. Maybe I want to change my prompt a little bit and then run it again. So this is for me an iterative process to really get started and understanding how these models work. So that will be the first category. You start and iterate very quickly, but the most important part is to understand if this is feasible. So now we know it's feasible and we advance the project to the next stage. Now we're really going to start the building. And if you're going to start the building, we are going to look at like, do we need prompt engineering or even fine-tuning, like training these models with my own data? Or do we go for a pattern like retrieval augmented generation, where you're not training these models, but you're leveraging these models with your own data? Like these are the kind of things that we're now going to decide after we have found like the project feasible. We are going to use like tooling for that to see, okay, what works the best? But to decide what works best, you need evaluation. I think this is a critical thing. And this is also the thing that if you really want to move beyond the playing stage, you really need to have a good evaluation strategy. And as I said before, evaluation for large language models might be a bit different than you're used to with machine learning operations or with any other evaluation strategies. But it's super important to have a good strategy here, because if you want to cope with, for example, new GPT-4 models or other models or even new technologies, you need to be able to understand like, okay, how is my current solution evolving? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do I need to tweak some knobs to get it better? And that's something I want to show you within AI Studio again, how you can do that. And I'm going to show not the code first interface today, because I only have 10 minutes, but I'm going to show the user interface. But please know, everything I'm doing at the moment, you can also do code first with your own applications, so you don't need to use the UI. So here I have an example of a customer lookup where I can say, okay, I want to order something, or I want more information on the products, and then it will just get it from the database. So what I can say here, okay, I've built a prompt, I've chatted with it, it seems to work. Now I want to run it at scale. So I can say I want to evaluate it. And then I can say, okay, I want to run automated evaluation on my dataset. And in this case, my dataset only has like number of questions. And we already provide you with quite some performance metrics or quality metrics that you can leverage without any programming. So you can already leverage these kind of evaluation metrics and see how your product performs. Of course, you can always add your own performance metrics to say, I have very specific metrics that I want to check for. But this is how easy you can get started. And then what you will see as an end result is, for example, in this metrics dashboard, like it's an earlier run, I can see, okay, for this use case and to retrieve augmented generation use case, how well am I doing? Like the groundedness, is there any hallucination? Or in this case, apparently my groundedness and relevance is very good. But for my coherence and fluency, like how well it's written and how natural it's written, I need to make some changes. So the next step is to go back to my prompt and say, okay, let's just change it a little bit. Let's see how it performs and run it again. And that's how you iteratively can improve it. If you don't have this, it's very hard to say, are you improving, yes or no? And I think that's the main issue that many companies have at the moment if you want to move to production. So when we talk about production and operationalizing this kind of systems, there are a lot of things to think about, because now we have done the evaluation and we're ready for the app deployment. But now we need to think about, okay, how am I going to do this kind of monitoring in production? Do I need additional content filters to make sure that what I'm building is safe, even though people are trying to break it? How am I going to deploy this in like a safe way, and then not in terms of content filtering, but more that if I want to do a redeployment, that I don't bring down our systems? So there are a lot of things that you need to think about if you're moving to operationalizing. And let me show you two things around this topic, the content filtering and how to do the monitoring in production. Because if we talk about the content filtering is something where you are able to tweak our existing content filters. So let me show you how that works. In this case, I created a custom content filter, and that custom content filter is in this case for OpenAI. By default, we have our content filters for most of the use cases. But it might be that you say, okay, for this use case, there might be violent content in the input because I'm making a summary of court documents. I don't know. So you are able to tweak it. But maybe you say, like, okay, I've done this. I want to also add prompt shields. So this is against jailbreak attacks. It's been a lot in the news, but we are also adding these kind of filters within our service to make sure that the risk is mitigated to a certain extent. And I can also say, okay, but for my output filter, it should never say anything. So I want to block everything around these categories to make sure that the output from my LLM will always be within the thresholds. If it's not within the thresholds, this kind of additional content filter will block it. And maybe after I've done this, I want to run my evaluations again, because now I want to understand, okay, am I improving? Am I ready for production? And you will see that this is all an iterative process, and it's, especially if we talk about continuous deployments, you need these kind of evaluation strategies. Otherwise, you can never go to production. And here, if I talk about deployments, actually the flow that I just did show you, I've also deployed it here as an endpoint. You can do it with, of course, your custom applications. You can leverage our prompt flow. But if I look here, I just deployed it, and I can also consume it. So let's just test it. If it's still working, okay. It's able to pull up my customer ID and it's giving me a response. So it works. But I just talked about evaluation, and that's the evaluation you're doing when you're building the product. But in the end, you also want some kind of monitoring on your live product. And that's what we also add here from AI Studio. We also add monitoring. I can set thresholds. At the moment, I don't have any traffic, but I can say, okay, I want to understand how many tokens are used and if it's running, so the operational side. But I can also check for generation quality, and I can say, for example, okay, I want to set thresholds on, for example, the fluency and the coherence. And if something changes in production, and I can select the sampling rate, it will also change, or it will give me a notification, and I can, together with my developers, have a look and see how I can mitigate the risk or how I can improve my systems. And by having this full end-to-end cycle, you're able to ship these kind of applications a lot faster. So if I'm looking here again at the LLM lifecycle, what we have been discussing together with AI Studio is how to get from the business need to an operational product. And the nice thing of these kind of products is that you can mix and match. So you can also say, okay, I'm already covered on some of these topics, but evaluation is a critical point for me. So you can just leverage a part of the AI Studio and leverage the evaluation with your own code pipeline, for example. Or you say, okay, I want to have a product that can solve my needs end to end. And that's where this system can support. But in essence, please know, it's a continuous process, and it's not something that you just do once. No, you will always keep going back and forth and keeping improving the models, the system, and your application. So now we've talked about this, but in my opinion, we have an exciting future ahead. A lot of things are coming out. If you look at the news, how many innovation we have seen on GenAI just in the last year, you have to be prepared for the innovation. Like bigger, better, faster, cheaper models will come out, open source, OpenAI, everything together. And if you don't have a solid LLMOps strategy, it will be very hard for you to join this, these new motions. So to end with, you can actually start today. Azure AI Studio is generally available, and it gives you a tool chain to get started with GenAI, to leverage all these models, and to join us on the GenAI journey. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.